Ladies and gentlemen, I am SidAlpha, and while I'm going to be bouncing about with this video in a more stream of consciousness style than I normally do, I want to stress that the main impetus behind this video is EA and the recent leaks surrounding Star Wars Battlefront 2 EA, which, while many of the points in the leak are still unconfirmed, there have been a large number of points within the leak that have been confirmed as true that lend a good amount of credence to what has been said. Now, I'll link the Reddit post down below, but it basically boils down to this. Electronic Arts, in true industry fuckery style, has all but abandoned Star Wars Battlefront 2, pulling 2 of the 3 development teams off of the project, and all recent reports surrounding upcoming content for the game shows no new characters or weapons and a very small map that is a rehash from the first Star Wars Battlefront EA title from 2015. Now, I've seen a lot of different reactions to this, all ranging from disgust to outrage to a resigned lack of surprise, and for my part, I actually have managed to experience all of that simultaneously. With EA, the writing is on the wall, and if any of you still think that EA gives a shit about video games or their customers, then you are flat out deluding yourselves. You've all heard the phrase, "Fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me," but what about fool me 997 times? You see, Electronic Arts has proven time and again that all they care about is bleeding their customers dry while offering as close to nothing in return as humanly possible. Yes, EA backed down from pay-to-win loot boxes in Star Wars Battlefront 2 EA after a massive PR backlash, which was great, it really was. However, while their left hand was busy feeding everyone the same old tired litany of shit about how they were continuing to listen and promise to do better for their players, the right hand was busy shoving loot box gambling into every other title they could get their grubby little mitts on, including their real flagship gambling line, FIFA, and its Ultimate Team mode. Even in spite of the Belgian and Dutch governments setting the precedent that loot box gambling like FIFA Ultimate Team mode is legally classified as gambling in those countries, making them illegal, Andrew Wilson has publicly announced that EA is dedicated to loot boxes and won't be backing down from them, feeding people the same old tired lines like, "We're always thinking about our players," and using fake conciliatory buzzwords like transparency, fun, fair, and balanced. Meanwhile, EA raked in over $1 billion in the first quarter of 2018 without even needing to release a new game to do it. And while I don't have any arguments whatsoever with the company making ridiculous piles of money, I do, however, have a problem with EA's Machiavellian methodology of getting it. Loot boxes and how they are presented to the player are a form of gambling, and while that is still being hotly debated, many are beginning to realize that to be the case. However, EA's Andrew Wilson recently made several statements that parroted statements made months ago by their lobbyist puppets over at the ESA and their favorite stepchild, the ESRB. Now, some of those statements ran along the lines of, Ultimate Team isn't gambling because players always receive a specified number of items. The company doesn't provide or authorize any way to cash out. The company doesn't assign real money value to its in-game items, and the company continues to work with regulators on both combating these services and the company's ability to utilize loot boxes as a live game revenue stream. And if you look at the broader actions of EA, all they amount to is snake oil salesmen that promise the world but deliver on absolutely nothing. Mass Effect Andromeda was a perfect example of how not to make a video game, and instead of fixing it like the BioWare of old very much would have done, EA decided to abandon all work on the game, failing to even fix the issues within the game that they had released, along with canceling all planned story mode DLC, at the same time shelving the Mass Effect IP, one of the most popular science fiction gaming franchises in the past 20 years, for an indeterminate period of time. And then, of course, there was the whole Star Wars Battlefront 2 EA controversy surrounding its pay-to-win loot boxes, the removal of which I'm all but certain was only to appease the House of Mouse and prevent the Star Wars rug from getting yanked out from underneath their feet. Now, EA even admitted that the removal of the loot boxes within the game was planned as being only temporary, but I can tell exactly how this went down. EA executives looked at how much time it took to rebalance the game to fix their pay-to-win slot machine fuckery and decided that was all the effort they were willing to dump into a game that didn't have slot machine gambling in it, as while yes, it could still be made to be profitable, it wouldn't be as profitable as any other game with slot machines, so they decided to just can the entire thing and try to quietly sweep it under the rug and wait for the next one, making claims that they were listening to player feedback while also jamming their digital slot machines into FIFA, UFC, and every other title under the undeservedly vast umbrella that is EA. And, you know, with Mass Effect Andromeda, I could understand EA's deciding to just abandon it. It was a shit game. Oh, the combat was better than the other Mass Effect games, but you don't buy a Mass Effect game just for the combat. You buy it for the story. And the story arc through the original Mass Effect series showed some really good storytelling, dynamic and interesting villains that were relatable, and ultimately their motivations were understandable and believable given the context of the scenarios in which they found themselves. And hell, the damn suicide mission at the end of Mass Effect 2 was some of the finest gaming I've ever experienced in my entire life when faced with a game that coupled story arc with game mission aspects. But what we were treated to story-wise within Andromeda was a basic story premise with multiple plot holes in the very foundation of the story large enough for an entire fleet of Reapers to be able to fly through shoulder to shoulder without ever getting close enough to scratch the paint. The villain was a complete MacGuffin, and the entire story arc was bland, shallow, and written exceptionally poorly. If I were the writer, I would be completely embarrassed. I may even do a video at some point where the objective would be myself and one other person coming up with a better plot and story arc in one sitting than what we got with Andromeda. But it's because of that, on top of everything else, that I could understand EA abandoning it. However, to see them do this a second time with Battlefront 2 over loot boxes? Well, ladies and gentlemen, this tells us one very important thing, that EA is not interested in creating video games for people to enjoy anymore. They're only interested in them insofar as they are the medium in which their digital casinos can be put in front of your faces. Now, you've all heard me talk in the past about how we buy games and how we have reached a point where the simple fact of it being a good game or a bad game should not be the only determinant factor any longer, and where the developer's actions or the publisher's actions in relation to their games and their customers should also be taken into account. Now, I've also read several comments where people have misconstrued or misinterpreted what it was I was saying there, so please allow me to clarify my point. Now, with that concept, I'm not talking about anyone's social or political beliefs becoming a determining factor behind whether or not a game should be purchased. Everyone has a fundamental right to believe what they want to believe, even if it's completely wrong. Take flat earthers, for example. They are objectively wrong on a scientific level, but they are welcome to continue believing as they wish to believe. And if a flat earther were to make a video game, I would judge the game based upon the game's merits and how the flat earthers treat their games and their customers, not because they're flat earthers. Instead of just calling them flat earthers, let's give them a name for the sake of example. Let's call them Game Studio. That's simple enough to remember. So let's say Game Studio releases a bad game, like really bad, full of bugs and glitches, and it was just not ready for launch. However, let's assume that Game Studio also listened to their customers, took their feedback, maintained open lines of communication, made promises, and stuck to them to the best of their abilities, and when they weren't able to meet their promises, they explained basically how and why and continued working on them. Yeah, they released a shoddy product, but underneath it all, you could determine a fair amount of ability and heart behind them. So with that, does it really matter that they're flat earthers? No, it really shouldn't, and it doesn't. And that's what I mean. Take their actions with their games and how they handle those games and how they handle their customers directly in relation to their games, and look at the overall picture as a pattern of behavior. Now, let's look at EA's actions over the course of just the past year. There was Mass Effect Andromeda, mismanaged at every level, bad design, poorly written, and abandoned right away. EA dedicated themselves repeatedly to loot boxes as a business model. Battlefront 2 and its whole pay-to-win controversy. EA's promises made that they would do better as a company in relation to loot boxes. EA's then continuing to implement loot boxes and pay-to-win mechanics in literally every other game under the sun, and EA realizes they will not be able to make as much money off of Battlefront 2 as they might want, and instead of being honest and coming right out and saying it, they instead decide to just quietly move on, as opposed to announcing that they're abandoning the game. And then EA continues to dedicate themselves to loot boxes even though some countries have deemed them to be outright illegal, while at the same time claiming that they're dedicated to their players. And that's just within the last year, and that doesn't even cover half of the chicanery and shenanigans that EA has perpetrated. Those actions and that pattern of behavior doesn't exactly paint a picture of a company that is deserving of your money, now does it? Now, EA seems to be a video game company that is far more interested in digital slot machines than they are actual video games. And do you still think EA is worth your money? Do you still think that we should take each individual title on its own gameplay merits? I really don't think we do. You see, that mentality of treating each game on its own merit also completely ensures that companies like EA will never change. That mentality allows you to buy the game guilt-free, yes, but it also allows them to continue to do whatever they want guilt-free because they know they will be able to take advantage of those that they can take advantage of and suffer absolutely no negative repercussions as a result, because then they know that no matter what, they're going to get your money. Now, who cares if they do a bad job on this one? Who cares if it's pay to win? Just dump it if it won't make as much money as you thought and move on to the next one because, hey, everyone's going to buy it regardless. Now, they treat their customers like hamsters waiting for a crack pellet because in reality, that's how we all act. Well, it's time that cycle was broken. It's time the EA and the other games publishers were made to respect their customers again, but that will only happen if you take a look at their actions as a company and take that into consideration each and every time you think about buying one of their Skinner boxes with a slot machine shoved inside of it. But as always, please do let me know what you think about all of this down in the comments below. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, I am SidAlpha, and I'll see you next time.